Welcome to Reddit Revenge Stories. Did you know over 90% of our viewers don't subscribe? If you enjoy this video, please subscribe and hit that like button. We're targeting 500 likes on this one. Let's dive into today's tale. My name is Martin Rees, and I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would sit down and recount how everything in his life unraveled piece by piece. But here I am. If you're listening to this or reading it somewhere, just know this isn't about sympathy, it's about truth. And if my story helps someone else catch the signs I missed, or understand the depth of betrayal that can come from the most unexpected places, then maybe it's worth it. I was 41 when things started to shift in my life. I had a stable job working in warehouse logistics for a distribution center just outside of Cincinnati. My wife, Claire, worked part-time as a substitute teacher at the local middle school. We'd been married for 15 years. We had our ups and downs like every couple, but nothing ever felt like it was cracking beyond repair. At least not to me. We lived in a modest two-story house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people actually wave at each other and borrow sugar when they run out. Claire liked the sense of community, and I'll admit, I did too. It felt safe, comfortable. We didn't have children, but we had talked about it in the earlier years. Eventually, time and circumstances just moved us past that conversation, and neither of us pushed it again. Still, I thought we were content. Next door lived the Millers, a family we'd known since moving in. Their son, Bryce, had grown up right before our eyes. I remember when he was a gangly little kid running around in the yard, playing catch with his dad. Bryce had just turned 20, attending the local community college and working part-time at an auto repair shop nearby. He still lived at home, but he was respectful, quiet, and always friendly. Claire had always liked Bryce. She'd talk about how polite he was, how he reminded her of her younger brother. I never thought twice about it. Honestly, if anything, I was glad she got along with the neighbors. The Millers were good people. At least I believed so. Around the start of spring, I noticed Claire had more pep in her step. She started dressing a bit more sharply. Nothing wild, just more effort than usual. New blouses, a bit of lipstick, even when she was just running errands. I joked that maybe she was going through a midlife fashion renaissance. She laughed and brushed it off, said she just wanted to feel better about herself. And why would I question that? Everyone deserves to feel good. But soon it wasn't just the way she dressed. Her phone was always close to her, even in the house. She'd started putting it face down, and one time I walked into the room and she quickly switched off the screen. Little things, barely worth noting, but they started stacking up in my mind. I tried not to let paranoia set in. I told myself I was overthinking, but I'd lie awake at night, wondering why she seemed more distant, more distracted, like she was present physically, but somewhere else entirely in her thoughts. Then came the day I took a half day from work because of a scheduling mix-up. I didn't tell Claire I was coming home early. I figured I'd surprise her, maybe grab lunch together. Something spontaneous, like we used to do. When I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't hear the TV, no music, nothing. I called her name and got no response. I moved toward the kitchen, figuring she might be outside. Then I heard voices, faint, coming from the back patio. I stepped softly toward the sliding glass door, and that's when I saw them. Claire and Bryce. Sitting close, too close. Her hand rested on his knee. They weren't doing anything explicitly wrong, but something about their body language was off. There was an intimacy that didn't belong in a conversation between a married woman and a neighbor's son. I stepped outside, and they both jumped slightly like teenagers, caught doing something they shouldn't. Bryce stammered a greeting. Claire tried to act casual, but I could see the tension ripple through her shoulders. I asked what was going on. Claire said they were just talking. Bryce had stopped by to ask about a book she'd recommended. He nodded along with her, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. I didn't accuse anyone then. I didn't yell. I just nodded and said I needed to grab something from inside. But my stomach was in knots. That image burned into my mind. Later that night, I asked her again, calmly, if anything was going on. She got defensive, said she was insulted I would even suggest something so inappropriate. She said Bryce looked up to her, that he needed guidance and maturity in his life, and she was just being a mentor figure, maybe even a mother figure. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But from that day forward, things didn't sit right. Claire started spending more time out of the house. She claimed she was volunteering at school events, subbing extra hours, meeting friends. I checked the school website one day. She wasn't listed on the substitute roster for the past few weeks. When I brought it up, she claimed there was an error, that the online system was always behind. There's a strange kind of pain that comes from doubting someone you've shared your life with. It gnaws at you slowly, eating away your peace of mind. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, but something inside me said I wasn't wrong. So I did something I'm not proud of. I went through her phone one night while she was asleep. I told myself I needed peace of mind. What I found wasn't explicit, but it wasn't innocent either. There were messages between her and Bryce. Most of them were deleted, but a few lingered in the threads. One in particular stood out. It was a simple message from Bryce. Last night meant a lot to me. I've never felt that connected before. My hands went cold reading that. The timestamp was from 3 nights prior. On an evening, she told me she was helping her sister organize some charity event. Her sister lives 3 towns over. When I texted her that night, she'd said she was exhausted and staying over to avoid the long drive home. The lies were there. They'd been there for weeks, maybe months. I didn't know the extent yet, but the crack had turned into a fracture. I didn't confront her right away. I needed more. Not because I didn't believe what I saw, but because I knew Claire. If I didn't have something undeniable, she'd twist it into paranoia on my part. She was smart, careful, she knew how to hide things. So I started watching. Not obsessively, but closely. I took note of her patterns, her excuses, and I started keeping a log. What time she left, what she said she was doing, how long she was gone. Then came the day that solidified everything. It was a Friday. Claire said she was going to a book club meeting at a friend's house, 2 neighborhoods over. I knew that friend. I also knew she was out of town that weekend. She'd mentioned it at a community gathering just days before. Claire left around 6:30 p.m. I waited 15 minutes, then followed in my truck, staying a few cars behind. I felt like some character in a spy movie, heart pounding, palms sweating. But I needed to see it with my own eyes. She didn't go to the book club friend's house. She went to the Millers. Bryce met her at the side door. He opened it with a smile that was far too familiar. They didn't notice me. I stayed across the street, parked in the shadow of a tree-lined curb. They went inside together. I waited over an hour. Then 2. Around 9 p.m. hour, I drove back home. When she returned later that night, she kissed me on the cheek, told me the book club ran long. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I looked at her, and for the first time in 15 years, I realized I didn't know the woman standing in front of me. Everything in my world was beginning to shift, and I had no idea how deep the betrayal would go, or how far I'd have to go to reclaim my own dignity. But I would find out soon enough. The days after that Friday night were a blur. I went through the motions of life, waking up, going to work, having dinner with Claire, but underneath, something had changed in me. It was like I was watching my own life from the outside, observing this facade we'd both helped build slowly crumble under the weight of a secret neither of us wanted to name. I kept quiet for one reason. I needed to understand why. Why her? Why Bryce? Why lie? Why risk everything we'd built together? There was no joy in snooping. I wasn't proud of how I had to find things out. But what would you do when your trust, your marriage, is being chipped away behind your back? I needed the truth, even if it hurt. I started noticing how often Claire managed to mention the Millers in passing. Saw Bryce mowing the lawn, he's really growing up. Ran into Bryce at the store, helped him pick out a gift for his mom. Innocent comments, but they kept stacking up. Then, one evening, I finally asked her how things were going with the book club. She hesitated, just a moment too long. It's good. We're reading a new mystery series. Just started it last week. Only I knew she wasn't there. I'd already checked the group's Facebook page. They hadn't met in 2 weeks, and the book she mentioned wasn't even on their list. So I asked her, "Do you ever talk to Bryce?" She smiled too quickly. Bryce? Sure. I mean, when I see him around, he's like family. I nodded. That night, I slept with my back to her, the air between us heavier than ever. I finally broke the silence 2 days later. I didn't plan a big confrontation. I was just tired, tired of pretending. We were in the kitchen. She was washing dishes and I was drying. I set a plate down and said, Claire, I know about you and Bryce. The water stopped. Her hands froze. She didn't turn to look at me. What are you talking about? She said, voice low. I followed you last Friday. You said you were going to book club. You went to the Millers instead. I saw you go in. I waited. Still, she didn't move. Then she finally turned, drying her hands on a towel, eyes narrowed. You followed me? That's your response? I asked. You're mad I followed you, not that you lied? She opened her mouth, then shut it again. Her shoulders slumped, and the mask she'd been wearing cracked. Martin, she whispered, it's not what you think. That line is older than our marriage? I said. Please don't insult me. She didn't deny it, didn't argue. Just sat down at the kitchen table and buried her face in her hands. I sat across from her, waiting. It wasn't supposed to happen, she finally said. It just did. I didn't go looking for it. He was hurting, confused. He'd come to talk, and I guess I was too lonely to push him away. I stared at her. You're blaming loneliness for this? I'm explaining it, she snapped. You've been distant for years, Martin. Work, stress, bills, that's all you talk about. I don't remember the last time you even looked at me like I mattered. That stung because part of it was true. Life had worn us down. The spark had dimmed. But that didn't give her a pass to light a new fire with a 20-year-old. I stood. So what is this? A midlife crisis? A way to feel young again? She shook her head, her eyes red. I didn't plan it. It's not some fantasy. Then what is it? She didn't answer. That night I slept on the couch. I needed space, emotionally, physically. She didn't argue. The next few days were cold and robotic. We didn't speak unless we had to. She moved like a ghost in the house. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I thought about confronting Bryce, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What would I even say? He was a kid, not legally but emotionally. I blamed Claire more. She was the adult, the one who should have known better. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not family. I wasn't ready for the judgment. I was ashamed. Ashamed of not noticing sooner. Ashamed of still loving her despite what she'd done. One afternoon, about a week later, I came home from work early again. Claire was home, reading on the porch. She looked up, startled. I thought you had a late shift today, she said. They cut hours, I replied. She nodded, eyes drifting back to her book. I stood there for a minute, then said, I want you to end it. She looked up. What? With Bryce, I said. End it. Now. She stared at me, then looked away. I already did. When? Last week, after you confronted me. I didn't believe her. Look me in the eye, I said. She did. It's over, Martin. I swear whether or not that was true, I couldn't say. But I took her word for it, for then. I told her I needed time. Space. She said she understood. I moved into the guest room. From there, we became roommates more than spouses. We talk about groceries, bills, basic logistics. Nothing more. But something else began eating at me, not just what happened, but the realization that even if she ended it with Bryce, part of her had already left me. Then came the blow I wasn't expecting. 3 weeks later, I ran into Bryce while walking to the mailbox. He looked awkward, sheepish. Mr. Reese, he said. Bryce. We stood there in silence. Then he said, I just wanted to say, I never meant to cause trouble. Too late for that, and I replied. He nodded, his hands stuffed into his hoodie pocket. I really cared about her, he said quietly. It wasn't just what you think. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Because it wasn't just physical, it had meaning, at least to him. Maybe to her too. I didn't say anything, just turned and walked away. That night, Claire asked if we could talk. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said, "trying to understand why I did what I did, and if I can fix anything." "Fix what?" I asked. "Our marriage? Or your guilt?" She paused. "Both." I sighed. "What do you want, Claire? Do you want this marriage? Or do you just not want to be the villain?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I don't want to lose you." "You already did," I said quietly. But even as I said it, part of me wasn't sure. Was I ready to let her go? After 15 years? We started therapy together a few weeks later. The counselor was kind, but firm. We unpacked things slowly, our distance, our resentments, the affair. Claire cried a lot. I stayed quiet a lot. One day, the therapist asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "Martin, do you think you can forgive her?" I didn't answer then. I didn't know. Because forgiveness is one thing, but forgetting, trusting again, that's another mountain altogether. We continued therapy. We talked more at home. Some days were easier, others tense and silent, but the damage had been done. And while part of me still cared about Claire, another part was slowly learning to let go. The next decision I made was one I never thought I'd have to, but it was time. There comes a point where a man has to choose between living in the past or stepping into a future that may be unfamiliar, even frightening but honest. That moment came for me about 4 months after I first confronted Claire. We were still living under the same roof, still attending therapy, still circling the wreckage of what used to be our marriage like two people surveying the remains of a house fire. Some days we talked, some days we didn't. There were moments when things felt almost normal, but they never stayed that way. The trust had been shattered, and no matter how carefully we tried to glue the pieces back together, the cracks still showed. One morning I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize myself. Not physically, I looked the same, but my eyes, they looked hollow, tired, like I'd aged 10 years in a few months. I realized I was living in a kind of emotional limbo, waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. That evening, I asked Claire to sit with me on the back patio. It was quiet out, with just a breeze moving through the trees. She brought out 2 mugs of tea, and I took mine more out of habit than desire. "I've made a decision," I said, not looking at her. She didn't speak, just waited. "I want a divorce." The words were simple, calm, but they shook the air between us. Claire didn't cry, not at first. She just stared into her cup. After a long pause, she whispered, "I kind of knew this was coming." I didn't make the decision lightly, I said. I wanted to give this every chance, but the truth is, I don't see a way back. I don't think either of us do. Tears filled her eyes then. She nodded slowly, as if agreeing with something she wished she could change but couldn't. "I'm sorry, Martin," she said. "I never meant to hurt you like this." "I know," I replied, and I believed her. But meaning well doesn't erase damage. We agreed to keep things civil. No lawyers, no fighting over possessions. We didn't have kids, and that made things simpler. The house would be sold and the proceeds split. We even agreed to split the furniture and household items fairly. We weren't at war. We were just done. Claire moved in with her sister temporarily while we prepped the house for sale. I stayed behind, alone in the space that had once held laughter, holiday dinners, shared late-night talks. Now it was quiet. But in that quiet, I found something unexpected. Peace. I took up walking in the evenings, something I hadn't done in years. I started reading again, cooking real meals instead of microwaving leftovers. I even went back to church, something I hadn't done since my 20s. Not because I needed salvation, but because I needed grounding. One Sunday after service, I ran into an old high school friend, Paul. We grabbed coffee and caught up. I didn't tell him everything, just that Claire and I had separated. He nodded, said he'd been through something similar years ago. "You think life ends when marriage ends," he said, "but sometimes it's just beginning. You don't see it at first, but it's there." I held on to that idea that maybe, just maybe, this ending was a doorway. Several weeks later, Claire and I met one final time. At the house. We were finalizing a few last details before closing it out for good. The rooms were empty now, stripped of the life we'd once shared. We stood in the living room, both silent. Then she said, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "Number, I don't hate you. I just don't trust you. And I don't love you the same way anymore. That's the hard truth." She nodded slowly. "I'll always regret what I did, but I hope someday you'll find peace." "I already have," I said quietly. She smiled, a sad smile. Then she picked up her bag and walked out the door. That was the last time I saw her in person. In the months that followed, I started to feel like myself again. Not overnight. It was a slow rebuilding. But there was a kind of freedom in it, too. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't questioning every smile, every late return, every phone call. One evening, I ran into Bryce at the grocery store. He looked startled when he saw me. I gave him a nod. He nodded back. We didn't speak. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. I don't know what happened to him and Claire after the divorce. I didn't care to find out. Maybe it fizzled out. Maybe it didn't. Either way, that chapter was closed. Instead, I focused on myself. I took a weekend trip to Michigan, something I always talked about doing but never had. I visited old friends. I reconnected with my younger brother, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. I even started volunteering with a community garden project. Not because I loved gardening, but because I wanted to be around people who were building things, not tearing them down. Eventually, I sold the house. I moved into a smaller place. One bedroom, simpler, quieter. But it was mine. No ghosts, no memories I didn't ask for. Looking back, I see now how easy it is to become numb in a relationship. You go through routines. Tell yourself everything is fine. Ignore the little red flags because you're too tired or too scared to face them. And then one day, you wake up in a life that isn't yours anymore. What Claire did hurt me deeply. Not just the act, but the deception, the erasure of all the trust we had. But I also learned something in the aftermath. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I learned that healing doesn't happen when you wait for someone else to fix things. It happens when you take ownership of your pain and choose to move forward anyway. I also learned that forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's just about letting go so the bitterness doesn't take root. I forgave Claire, not to excuse her, but to free myself. If you've made it to the end of this story, maybe you're going through something similar. Maybe you've been betrayed, or maybe you've betrayed someone else. All I can say is this: be honest with yourself, with others. The truth hurts, but lies wound deeper. I'm still rebuilding, still learning how to live with the scars, but I'm no longer living in fear, no longer stuck in the shadow of what went wrong. There's light on the other side of heartbreak. You just have to walk toward it.